Hello from Melbourne, Australia again, and welcome to episode 2 of When Movies Were Good, hosted by Rachel and a very good friend of mine, Matt. We appreciate you being here today, or rather tonight, or wherever you are in your time zone when you're listening to this. And I thought we'd just go straight into our delightful duo this week. The two films that we will be discussing, Matt and I will be discussing, is The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938 Technicolor swashbuckler film starring Olivia de Havilland and Errol Flynn. And then, of course, our second film that we will be discussing is the 1940 Alfred Hitchcock classic Rebecca, starring Olivia's sister, the great Joan Fontaine, and also Sir Laurence Olivier. So, Matt, I'll just give you a bit of background into these films, which I know that you're well aware of. Both of us have watched them recently. I know you're a big fan of Rebecca.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I know you mentioned that you've seen it many times, and both of us have just recently seen Robin Hood. So Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, of course, is based on the very famous fables of Robin Hood. And actually, Douglas Fairbanks was one of the first actors to play him in Hollywood anyway. So this film came out in 1938. It did star Olivia de Havilland and Errol Flynn. It also starred Basil Rathbone and Claude Rains as well, who I barely recognised in this film until I saw the credits. I was like, wow, is that Claude Rains? I'm too used to seeing him as Phantom of the Opera or something like that. And it was directed by two people, Michael Curtis and William Kiley. And the screenplay was done by three people, Norman Riley Rain, Sexton Miller, and Rowland Lee. So this was really a breakout film for, Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland had already worked together a few times before, but this film really was a breakout for her, sort of stepping up into that leading lady, and it just kind of cemented Errol Flynn as the star of the swashbuckler film. And both of them went further in his career, and unfortunately Errol had a few issues, going on. So what were your thoughts about this film? I mean, obviously the Technicolor aspect would be of interest to you.
Oh, yeah, well, the favorite part for me, without a doubt, is very early when the Prince John spills a goblet of wine and we see this beautiful red liquid pouring onto the floor in that nice Technicolor, so obviously representing blood. It was like saying, haha, censors, you got a problem with wine? We know you think it's blood, but you can't do anything about it. Yeah, that's my favorite bit. It's such a great use of color, and like the story is absolutely great. There's no use getting it all into the historical anomalies.
Yes.
If anything, it's not even really so much the fables of Robin Hood it's more like the sort of Victorian age myth making based on the myth of Robin Hood almost. A lot of the caricatures and the way they use the color, it like so often in the medieval period we associated with this dark, sinister aspect, sort of Baldric and the Monty Python people shouting, "Bring out your dead," but there could be so much color as well. And like, I love medieval manuscripts, the illuminated Bibles and prayer books with all these colorful illustrations that had this often wacky sense of humor. And so that bright Technicolor Robin Hood picture, it really captures some of that sort of illuminated cartoon quality of the Middle Ages that many people have forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, it was shot all in California, all around California, actually up near where the Kardashians live in Calabasas, right around that sort of area going out towards Malibu. So, I mean, back then there wouldn't have been many homes or anything out there, and yet they really managed the production design on the film was absolutely beautiful. And up until that time, it was the most expensive Warner Brothers film that they'd ever made. And I think that shows.
Well, definitely. I mean, color technology at that time in itself was the most expensive thing you could do. It was effectively you had to have three cameras in one because you needed to have a 3-strip color process capturing simultaneously, which had to be then placed together in the lab afterwards. and Technicolor cameras, they notoriously needed huge amounts of light.
Right.
And that's especially why you hear about a lot of this in the Wizard of Oz as well. The characters were so much sweltering under those high spotlights.
I see. So in the sets indoors, like say for example in the castle, they would have needed to have a lot of like artificial light to light that set to get the.
Oh yeah, it wasn't. Of course, it looks very artificial and stylized, but that's as much for technological reasons as it was for creative reasons. Um, a little bit of a side note about what you were saying about the Kardashians' living location and not many people around there. Actually, there are photos of California on the beaches, which are now such heavy tourist hotspots, but there were actually pictures in the 1920s of wild cattle just moving
Yeah.
casually along the beach lines.
Yeah,
So I just
really
had
is.
to mention that.
Yeah, no, it's really an interesting place, and I suppose it was kind of their playground. I guess, I mean, all of the sort of Warner Brothers and all that, they haven't really actually changed too much with their actual locations within Hollywood and the other parts of Los Angeles, but all these sort of shots that they were able to do in Pasadena and other sorts of places, yeah, there's just no chance that they would be able to do them now. So what did you think of the actors in this film? What did you think of, well, a lot of people erroneously called Errol Flynn Irish when he first went to America, but we know that he was born in Tasmania and then had actually started his acting career here and then managed to go over to the US.
Well, it's interesting how exotic backgrounds some stars from this period could have. I mean, after all, Vivian Leigh, she was born in colonial India, so it's
Yes.
quite a clash of worlds to see then going to Sherwood Forest or to Tara.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the you can definitely tell why Errol Flynn has epitomized the tradition of Robin Hood for so long. I'm still waiting to see Kevin Costner just for the sake of a few laughs in that role as well.
And I never saw that one with Carrie Elways in it either. The Men in Tights, with that Mel Blancs one, Mel Brooks, sorry, not Blancs, the voice character
Oh
actor.
well,
Sorry. Yeah.
that's a very clear spoof of the Errol Flynn Robin Hood tradition, and you already get a sample of that in the Disney animated film they made a few decades afterwards. I think, as far as the most convincing acting, I could definitely, perhaps because it's he's such an evil character, you don't mind him indulging a bit of the hyperbole theatrics, but I love Claude Rains. Now, of course, Olivia de Havilland is a stunning presence, and she, well, Hollywood was never mind what happened behind the camera, but Hollywood was
Yes.
a dream spot for good female presence in front of the camera to have these strong, vibrant characters, and Olivia de Havilland had. It's a complete opposite to what she did in Gone with the Wind, sort of the shy, sickly person. She was a much more assertive.
Yeah, well, she did say, I was reading some interviews with her, and she said she really did fight to get more character-driven roles. I mean, they saw her as sort of an ingenue, I guess, as her sister as well. They were very similar in appearance. And she said she really sought out and fought to get different roles. And some of her roles, I'm actually curious to see some of the other films I was reading about that she was in, particularly the ones she won her Academy Awards for, because she actually wanted the part in Gone with the Wind. Most actresses wanted the Vivian Leigh's role, the Scarlett O'Hara role, but she didn't want that. She actually did want, it's Melanie, isn't it? Is my memory is it's Melanie? Is it Melanie? I believe it is
I
in
think
Gone
so.
with. Yeah, in Gone with the Wind. She actually wanted that role because she felt that that was more of a character-driven role. So, yeah, but as you said, it does roughly follow sort of the plot line of Prince John. So Claude Rains' character takes over the throne basically from his brother, Richard the Lionheart. It sort of usurps his position. And then Robin Hood and his band of men try to take up the quest to restore him to the throne, which they not to give the ending away, but they sort of do. So, and of course, Maid Marian, I guess, is sort of Prince John's ward or someone in the castle, and then she kind of joins with them. So there's a lot of great fight scenes, and just some of the scenes the outdoor feast that they were having. Do you remember that scene? That was just beautiful. Like,
it's they just delighted in the sort of colourful gluttony.
Yes, it's beautiful.
It's funny because when you think of it, it's kind of a bit hard to make large chunks of meat look glamorous.
Yes. The whole thing, I just thought that was probably one of my favorite sequences of the film. And of course, the film was nominated for Best Picture, but didn't win. But it did win for art direction, editing, and that wonderful score. I'm probably going to massacre his name by Eric Korngold. I was going to say cornflakes, but no, I think it's Korngold. What say you? What was did you like the film? Was it just sort of standard fare for you?
Oh, I think the film's amazing. I do wish, though, in the sword fighting scenes, even for that time, they could have made a more convincing sound, because it sounds like they're hitting spoons together.
Yeah.
Very sort of tinny swords, and that partially led to a bit of a illusion about medieval fighting, which I think pervaded even a few years later when Laurence Olivier did his famous movie of Henry V, mm-hmm. and you had all these strange pictures of knights being hoisted by cranes onto horses and stuff, and it's a bit of a myth because I used to study up on period weapons quite a bit, and armor could actually be quite adaptable to your movement when it had to be, and at the same time swords like rapiers, which are the kind that we see in Renaissance fighting, in Robin Hood, they're meant to be more broadswords, but they could do some serious damage even to armor. And so you'd want to hear a bit more of a clunk, but then I suppose they did want it to be a bit more rhythmic. It's almost like it's the whole clickety clacking of the swords is a bit more like almost a light percussion ensemble.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did enjoy those sword fights, but they were quite entertaining. And look, I just thought the film was a beautiful film, and it's just a throwback to a completely different time, and you just don't see stuff like that now.
Especially that big shadow of the two of them appearing on the column in the sword fight. Oh,
yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and it was, it was interesting. I mean, the script was serviceable and it worked really well. And I thought Errol was fantastic, and I thought Olivia was absolutely stunning. So if we move over to Olivia's sister, Joan, who basically burst onto the scene at a very similar time to Olivia. She was 18 months younger, so they really came up together, although Olivia sort of made her, she went to Warner, and I believe Joan went to RKO. She went over there. So now, Rebecca is interesting to us because we're Alfred Hitchcock fans, and that was his first American film. So this one was made in 1940, and it was produced by David O. Selznick, who was at the time working on or finishing up Gone with the Wind. So he had a lot going on with what he was up to. But the interesting thing about this project was that Alfred Hitchcock had done his own treatment of Daphne du Maurier's novel. I hope I've pronounced that right. But yes. David O. Selznick saw his treatment, was like, no, we bought the rights to that novel and we're going to make that novel. So they ended up getting a few other. So the script was written by Robert E. Sherwood and Joan Harrison. As we had just said, it was Hitch's first American project, and it was based off the novel. So the cinematographer was George Barnes, and the music was done by I didn't realize how much music of this gentleman I knew, which was Franz Waxman. I didn't realize he'd done Sunset Boulevard, he'd done, Taras Bulba, a lot of these other films that I know of or I'm familiar with. And it did win the Academy Award for Best Picture. and Best Cinematography. And that was the only one that he won. You think of Hitch's other films, and that was the only one he won the Academy Award for.
Well, technically, Hitch didn't win the Academy Award for that, and this he went into detail with when he was doing his long interviews with Francois Truffaut a couple of decades later. That was the Best Picture Oscar that the film won, and so that went to David O. Selznick, the producer, not to Hitchcock personally.
Oh, right.
So
I guess
Hitchcock he never personally won an Oscar, although he did get 3 nominations. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride, he used to say.
Yes.
And it's actually interesting that to look at because that's not really his first American production, not in a full independent capacity. It was a much more of a fused relationship between him and Selznick, because there was quite a bit of a power struggle in that film. Hitchcock was just not used to how American producers worked when he first arrived. Back in England, the producers in a company were much more like the sponsors of an opera company or a theater company, where their influence was much more in the financial sector. They'd occasionally make visits onto set.
So hands off sort of thing.
Yes, whereas in America, particularly Selznick, who was, as I understand it, a wannabe writer, and he just ended up being a very wealthy producer instead. Poor guy. So
yeah, I mean, what the trials and tribulations. I suppose you could say it certainly looks that way. So a young woman, and we never actually know her name. It's just the second Mrs. De Winter, isn't it? We never actually know her name in this film. So this is Joan's character, who's married to who's married to Sir Laurence Olivier in this film. So a young woman marries an older widower and moves to his large and dark mansion, and there she discovers, or tries to discover, the secrets and lies of the mansion, and then of his very often mentioned first wife Rebecca, and all the machinations of the people that live in the house. So what's your feelings on this film, Matt? Do you like it? Or I know
well, I can't tell if there's a bit of a freeze on the screen, so my apologies if what I'm saying now doesn't get heard, but I'll just keep going. So
yeah,
I do love that movie very much. It's obviously a very Freudian film, especially you can tell that there's this hint at it's hard to tell how literal Hitchcock was thinking about. You can tell that this sort of contradictory relationship between Mrs. De Winter, the housekeeper, the late Mrs. Olivier, and
that's okay. We're just having a few technical difficulties here because we're recording this remotely.
Yes, we can't wait till post-COVID-19.
That's okay. We'll leave it in for posterity. That's fine. So you were saying that you thought it was quite a Freudian film.
Yes, well, I think that part where they're in Mrs. De Winter's bedroom, and when she's holding up the nightgown and says, "Look, you can see my hand." Right. That was Hitchcock did have fun with the senses when he could.
Yeah, well, I absolutely, before we get back to Joan in this film, and I thought Joan was great, and I did like Florence Bates as her employer. I thought she was absolutely hilarious. And I'm a big soaps and serials fan, and also a big Batman fan. And I saw a few people that I was quite familiar with. Judith Anderson, who became, I believe, Dame Judith Anderson. She was in Santa Barbara. I mean, how do these people in the 1980s end up in soap operas? I don't really, but a lot of them did actually. And then George Sanders, I knew from Batman and some other films I saw him in. So I just thought the whole thing was a bit odd when I saw the two of them, but it was still pretty entertaining. And what did you think about Joan in this film? Well, Laurence was great.
Yeah, so I thought Joan had a beautiful presence. She was in the actual life on set as well as on the screen. She had this great timid and fear, which came across very well. And unfortunately, that was partially influenced by life, we believe. Olivier, who could be quite hard to work with when he wanted to be. He was rather ticked off that his own wife at the time, Vivien Leigh, didn't get picked for the part, and Vivien
Oh,
Leigh had actually screen tested for her role. So he and he so unfortunately they never got on that well, even though he was the perfect charmer.
yeah,
Uh,
that's
because
interesting. Because she went through, I was reading that Joan went through quite a lot to get the role. It was like 6 months of meeting with people and, I don't know if necessarily a lot of screen tests, but it was just, being involved in it before she finally got the role. I mean, she was very young at the time.
Yes, and Selznick wanted to repeat the publicity stunt he done with Gone with the Wind, where he created this myth that like hundreds of girls had been searched through in casting to find that perfect person for the role, and he wanted to create the same stunt for Rebecca. He'd Because he was still high on the heels of Gone with the Wind's amazing success, and then as for the rest of his life, he'd be spending most of his career trying to repeat the same success. And he did everything he could to promote Rebecca. I think he even had a plane write the word Rebecca in the sky, which back before everybody was doing that for a marriage proposal.
Yeah, and I did also read that, even though he was wrapping up work on Gone with the Wind and had a lot going on, he decided to get really involved in editing and re-recording certain parts of dialogue. So I'm sure Hitch wouldn't have been particularly happy about that.
Well, I think I'm not sure if it began then, but Hitchcock was known for creating fake technical problems on set when producers visited, so they'd get put off and go away.
Well, I'm sure David probably wasn't put off, but yeah, no, I mean, look, I thought the film was, I'm actually really keen to, I haven't seen Suspicion, which is the film that she did after, Joan did after this with Hitch as well, and the one that she did win the Academy Award for. Have you
with
seen
Cary
that?
Grant.
With Cary, yeah, I haven't seen that, so I might try and track that down this week and actually watch that. So that's the perfect segue into why we chose these films this week, because of the sisters, as we mentioned. So we thought it was particularly hilarious. Matt, maybe you'll share the story of why we chose these films.
Yeah, and let's pray my microphone doesn't break up on this juicy tidbit. But yes, so Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland, they were Hollywood sisters.
Yeah.
For various reasons, they didn't get on that well from early on, and basically from the 1940s, they were not really on speaking terms.
Yep.
Both of them lived to incredibly ripe ages. Joan Fontaine only died a few years ago at about 96.
Yes. Yeah,
Olivia de Havilland,
2013.
yeah, Olivia de Havilland is still alive
Yep.
now.
Good on her.
We did double check on that just before we recorded this. Would have been
Yeah.
embarrassing otherwise.
And she's the last person of that era alive, or at least of that stature, I believe. I was reading
definitely that stature.
Yeah.
There might be I know Wikipedia has a list of the people from that age that are still around, although it's probably a smaller list by the day.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's true.
But she
yes,
was born. The sisters were born in 1916 and 1917. I mean, it's just not long after the Titanic sank. I mean, you think about the era that they grew up. They were 18 months apart in age, and speaking for many years and then in 1975 their mother died, and that really set them off. They didn't really ever speak again after that, I believe. So
yeah, well, for two sisters to not be on speaking terms for 70-something years, or almost completely non-speaking terms, I mean, this has to be the ultimate catfight.
yeah.
I mean, who needs the bold and the beautiful?
Yeah, that's. And I think I was reading an interview with Olivia that was done when she was 100, and she's 104 now, or turning 104 or something like that, and she still was calling her a cow. So, I think it was just something that was never that was never ever going to be rested. But we thought that was sort of a very interesting story. But it was still great to see both of those films. So we want to thank you for joining us tonight. We had a lot of fun. We're sorry about the technical difficulties. If it's a bit patchy in some parts, we apologise. But hopefully, once the lockdown is over for COVID, we can actually record together and it'll make it a lot better. So, yes. Matt, did you want to lead us out and just mention where people can find you?
Yeah, so we have 2 video channels where you can see us currently. So we have our YouTube channel and our Vimeo channel. Now, so you can hit subscribe onto our channel, hit the like button as well. We do love a good like. Put some comments in. You can press the bell on the subscription on YouTube as well, so you can get notified of future episodes. And we also have our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. So we look forward to always giving you new updates on the show, maybe bits of vintage goss here and there.
Absolutely. We love all those backstage machinations. Anything else that you want to say before we sign off tonight?
No, I'm sure I'll come up with more channels to promote our work on later, but I'll tell you in future episodes.
Oh, fantastic. So everybody, our delightful duo next week is an Elizabeth Taylor double, Place in the Sun, 1951, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, 1958. So that is our double in the next few weeks when we release our new one. And so just to sign off, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, everybody, and take care.
Good night.
Good night.